don't know. I did it wrong. So this is not. It really feels like a living room.
Yeah.
It's very nice. Actually, if you were to go back to the times of Liszt and Chopin, that's what they did. They didn't play recitals in big giant halls like we did, the other day at the big hall. Which that happened. There's a funny story there. I hadn't planned on talking about this, but that was something Liszt himself did, the first piano recital, because he had the audacity to have the chutzpah to roll a piano out on the stage of the Paris Opera and play. And that was, you didn't do that before. Pianos were, a living room, the salon. That's what the word is, the salon. So, what I want to do first is, maybe because we're meeting like this, I'm being a little silly and lighthearted. I have this thing I like to combine, not just in music, but in accents too. I like to do impersonations. And I like to combine things that really shouldn't fit. And I want to do an improvisation like this, but first I'll tell you about accents that don't seem to fit. I had this wonderful teacher in high school for French class, and she spoke with the thickest Queens or Brooklyn accent that you could imagine. I grew up in New Jersey. I don't advertise that, but nothing wrong with New Jersey. But and we get to her class, and she says, "All right, welcome to my class. We're gonna talk French here." And the other kids were looking at each other and were thinking, how is she gonna teach the French language? And then she says, "Well, I was actually born over there in France. I grew up there." And she said, then I met my husband in Queens, came over here. And I thought, this is very interesting. I said, "All right, let's talk French." And then so she goes, "Bonjour classe, maintenant on parle français." Just perfect French. She says, "Can you follow me so far?" And it was, so that's the story. But what I want to do, the musical equivalent is, okay, what are some famous classical themes, melodies that you like? Really anything, just that everyone knows. Claire de Lune. I don't know if that would work. What do you say?
Great gates.
Oh, you love that piece. The great. Okay, that might work better. That's a very diluted version of that. What if I did that in a Southern gospel style?
Oh,
Would that? I'm sorry if that's not exactly what. That's not the Great Gate of Kiev. It's the Great Gate of, I don't know, Nashville or something. But it'll. Let's see. Let's go in G. Okay. Yeah. Now I'm going to play some more real music. This is Ave Maria by Schubert. Some of these you've heard me do, some of them might be new for me and you, maybe even still new. This I think I played for you last month. Ave Maria, of course, I'm not going to sing. I'm terribly sorry. But Well, you'd be grateful to me because I can't sing. In my mind, it sounds like Maria Callas or Pavarotti. And then I open my mouth and it really sounds terrible. I've had people say to me, like, they'll tell me, oh, you shouldn't say that. You ought to try singing. You should do it. And then I open my mouth and they change their tune, no pun intended. They said, well, maybe just leave it. But the text to Ave Maria is, you hear it sung in Latin, right? It's the Hail Mary prayer, but that's not the text Schubert used initially. It was a different prayer to Mary that he used, but it was a German translation of part of a poem by Sir Walter Scott, The Lady of the Lake. There's some trivia you can tell your friends tonight at dinner. Did you know Schubert did not use the Latin Hail Mary text? It's really, depending on how you say it, it can be interesting or condescending, but I don't know. So that's, I found that fascinating because I hadn't known that until learning this. Now, Schubert sadly died at 31. 31, and he was very ill in his last years, and he composed an enormous amount of music in those last 3 or so years because he knew his time was limited. And that's when he wrote this. He wrote this in 1825. He died in 1828. What happened was when he died, he was not only penniless, he was unknown completely, and except for a small circle of friends. Liszt was one of the people who sort of came across his music and posthumously performed it and promoted it. And one of the biggest things Liszt did to promote it was to do these arrangements of Schubert, of his lieder, his songs for piano solo. And he played them in his early recitals, popularizing Schubert. So what you're going to hear is an interesting progression of things. That it starts pretty straightforward, like the original lead. You're going to hear this, just like you've heard. But then what does he do in the verses that follow, the second, the third verse? He puts the melody in the thumb of the left hand and does all these flourishes in the right hand. Those flourishes, that's not Schubert, that's Liszt. Some would say maybe, oh, he was just showing off, he couldn't help himself. I don't think so. I think that Liszt was a very shrewd arranger, and he knew that if you just replicate the same melody over and over with no words changing, it's not going to carry as a solo piano piece. So that's how he creates variety there. So that's it. Oh, is that the microphone? Should I take the mic? Because I'm happy if you can hear me like this. I can also, I have small kids. Sometimes I have to use that big voice to get them to. Oh, there.
Test, test. Hello, hello.
Fantastic. Okay.
Yay.
Yay.
I'm going to bring it up here.
Oh
no.
Thank you. Oh, no worries. Now we have a microphone, so I can talk low, but it's going to still be loud. Now I can sing exactly what I do. Yeah, you know what to say. This is No Singing, Ave Maria by Schubert, arranged by Liszt. I was playing this at a place where they mostly do old-time gospel, and this friend of mine, he's a country gospel singer, and I played this there. And he said, now we're going to hear some Schubert, or as we call him down south, Sherbert. That was really funny. So, but in all seriousness, this is Ave Maria by Franz Schubert. Thank you. So that's Liszt's interpretation of Schubert. And it's proof, I think, that Liszt there are many different facets to Liszt's personality. I used to believe when I was younger, because there's this thought that people believed that Liszt was a superficial, showy sort of person. And maybe that was part of his character. It could be. But there was so much more to him than that. The depth and introspection that he brings to that, and also this other piece I'm going to play, the Consolation Number 3 by Liszt. Strangely, I'm playing an original piano piece, not an arrangement. Why, you might ask, I decided to learn this because I came across Nathan Milstein playing it on the violin, and I thought, oh goodness, I should play it on the piano, because I'm obsessed with other instruments and maybe not the piano so much. Well, that's not completely true, but Liszt was fascinating because he was this kind of Paganini-like, rock star-like, performer, but he was also, did you know about his devout religious convictions? He was Catholic, and he wanted, at many points in his life, he wanted to become a priest. And there's a story, I maybe told you this, and if I have, forgive me, but I just think it's a great story. He was, in later years, he would live in the Vatican, and he would wear a priest's collar, even though he wasn't a priest. But he was so devoted to it, really, truly. It wasn't just a performance of him, he was very religious. And he was finally about to get ordained, and he was in the Sistine Chapel waiting, and unfortunately, there was a piano there. And he sat down, he started to play. And I think most of the nuns fainted. That's the story. I don't know if it's true, but that's the story. And then the cardinal came, or the bishop, and they tapped him on the shoulder, and they said, you just get right out of here. Poor Liszt, it didn't quite work for him. But this piece he wrote in 1849, which is significant because he wrote it, first of all, right after his friend Chopin died. Well, his friend. I think Liszt would have considered Chopin his friend. I don't think Chopin would have considered Liszt to be his friend. Not to badmouth anyone, because Chopin is one of the biggest geniuses ever. If you ever get a chance to read some of Chopin's letters, oh boy, he could be an acidic person. That's acerbic, acidic, that's an understatement. And he looked down at Liszt a lot. He thought Liszt was superficial showman, that's what he thought. And there's a story of this, that Liszt was playing some of Chopin's music in a recital, and of course adding lots of notes. And Chopin just pulled him aside and said, if you're gonna play my music, play what I wrote, for goodness sake. So this piece though, Liszt writes as a tribute to his friend, and he writes it in his style. It truly sounds like Chopin. Here, I'll play you some of it as an example. It just sounds like a Chopin nocturne to me. Right. In the middle, it takes a turn, it's a different direction that's very Lisztian, but it just has that aura of Chopin there. And that's, what better way to pay tribute to a friend than to write something in their style. The other thing that's on my mind is there's a feeling of maybe resignation or something like that in this piece. Before 1849, 1 year prior in 1848 was one of the worst years in European history. There was fighting in the streets, the revolutions, there was, it was terrible. Think of 1968 in this country. Maybe not so different. And I think maybe there's some disillusionment in this piece as well to that. So here is Franz Liszt's Consolation Number 3. And the word consolation, it comes from poetry by Alphonse de Lamartine, French poet at that time. He has poems called Consolations. So. that in the music of Liszt and also Schumann, I'm going to play a short piece by Schumann next, there's some foreshadowing of French Impressionism. You can hear some Debussy there, like when melody and accompaniment melts into some sort of a color effect, you know. He creates like a visual thing, and I think Debussy and Ravel are very visual, and Héricourt too, by the way, very visual composers. And Liszt created a new form called the tone poem, which means that instead of saying, oh, I'm writing a sonata, you know, well, I'm writing, like Liszt wrote, the Dante Sonata. No one did things like that before. It's a sonata, but it's based on the Divine Comedy by Dante. Who would do that? Or this piece, this is a poem by Alphonse de Lamartine. No words, just, it's kind of abstract in a way. But creating that mood, that's a very profound thing that Liszt, could do. So here's a late work of Robert Schumann, Abend Lied Evening Song. And it's the Eusebius character of his. So what do I mean? Schumann had bipolar disorder, and he was also a very brilliant writer, and he actually created characters in his writings that represented parts of himself, the manic side and the depressive side. Florestan was the manic side. Eusebius was the opposite, the depressive side, and that's this piece. This piece is so calm, it's eerie. You can't be that calm in life sometimes. You need to have there's just no conflict, there's nothing disturbing about it. And I think that what's the most disturbing about that, you know what they say, like water that's completely still collects bad things, and water that's running, it's cleaner, right? Schumann sadly was he was declining a lot when he wrote this piece. He was hearing voices, he was hearing a ringing of the note A in his ears. Like all of his, not all, but a lot of his late music's in the key of A. Piano concerto. You can hear it. It's like a feature of a lot of his late music. Some historians have found that he might have had lead poisoning too. So did Beethoven. That's a whole other. You know why Beethoven had lead poisoning? Unfortunately, they checked samples of his hair, and they discovered that he liked to drink a very cheap and not very good wine from somewhere in Austria, and that the grapes were not grown well, and they had some lead in them. So anyway, so that's what it was. And at this time, not long after he wrote this piece, he jumped into the Rhine in the middle of winter in February, and fishermen rescued him, and he spent several years living in an asylum. And at the last moment, about 2 years had gone by, and Clara finally snuck in to see him, his wife, Clara Schumann. No visitors allowed, but Clara just didn't care. And I think it was the next morning he was gone at 46 years old. So this piece is from a set called Music for Children, Young and Old. And I love that title because he loved the theme of childhood in his later years. He was a father, and that was a lot of his later music is about childhood, including this piece, Evening Song, Abend Lied. much. Now I'm going to play a longer piece that you've heard before. And this is not the Ludoslavsky Paganini. I'll give that this month off here. That's not everyone's favorite, although some people, oddly enough, really like it. That's the very dissonant one I've played for you before, and maybe left your ears ringing. This might too. This is Brahms' Paganini Variations, Book 2. I've played it for a little while now, a few months, more than that. And I'm going to be traveling soon to Florida. Well, not for vacation, but I'm going to be playing. So I've been, reworking some old pieces like this. And I'm thinking I'm going to play. I don't know if Floridians will like it. Maybe. I'm sure. I mean, I don't know why not, but I want to tell you. Maybe you've heard me explain Brahms's young years, and there's more to this story now that I played some Liszt today. That Brahms, as a very young man, he was brilliant. He wrote these 3 piano sonatas early on, and after that, I think it was after he wrote those, he wanted some more lessons, some advice from some other composers older than him. And one of his stops was actually to visit Franz Liszt in Weimar. Liszt was living in Weimar at that time. And I told you Liszt was, had many sides to him. He was not only a showman, but he was. And let's also be honest, Liszt kind of was a show-off, it's true. So young Brahms was traveling, I guess, by horse carriage. You couldn't just fly or drive back then. He was exhausted. He gets to Weimar and he shows Liszt some of his music, and Franz Liszt says something to the effect of, "Oh, well, that's nice. Now let me play you some of my music." Which I don't blame him. Liszt had just written the B minor sonata, which is a masterpiece, but it's 40 minutes long. And Brahms, in his defense, or so he said, was very tired from the trip, and he fell asleep. And Liszt finished and looked over, and he sees this young guy from Hamburg has fallen asleep during my music, and Liszt never forgave him for that. So that's why you don't hear much about Brahms and Liszt. And Liszt didn't do any arrangements of Brahms, and so there's a little tension between them, you could say, after that. So I think that then the next stop was the Schumann's home, and this is where the young Brahms was practically adopted by the Schumanns, and that was around the time that piece was written by Robert Schumann. And young Brahms helped the family through Robert's decline and his death. And it was when the family took an extended trip to Switzerland to process the grief, of course. The neighbors in Dusseldorf, the neighbors started to gossip. And they said, this is strange because this Clara was 15 years older than young Brahms. And so they said they must be dating or something. This is like People magazine, it's really silly. And this rumor kind of started. And the historians that I've read said, no way, Brahms and Clara were just platonic friends with a deep admiration for each other. I think Brahms had some unrequited feelings for her, that's, I think, for sure, but it wasn't more than that. Sorry to keep being People magazine, but I also recently read that at some point both Brahms and Clara took all the letters that they had written, burned them, and threw them in a river somewhere. So that also doesn't help their case. But I don't know, I wasn't around, and it doesn't matter. But I believe the historians. I think that it's been overhyped, the idea of a love triangle or something. As one historian said, people like to do this with music history because the reality is that actually Brahms led a fairly boring life. He liked to, he composed most of the time, and then he would go to a pub and have Wiener Schnitzel and beer and talk to his friends, and that was pretty much it. By the way, then at some point he grew that big Santa Claus beard. But this piece was before that, the Paganini Variations. He bases it on the 24th Caprice by Paganini. And what he does with it is almost obsessive. He gives these little variations or snapshots, if you will, of that in so many different moods. Listen to the quiet variations. There's only 2 or 3 of them. And those, to me, are the real soul of the piece. And that's maybe where you hear his feelings towards Clara, because he was 29 when he wrote this. Funny enough, Clara, who he relied on a lot for musical advice, she hated this piece with a passion. She said that they're wretched witches' variations. That's what she said, which may not sound so bad, but in the 19th century, that's a pretty big insult. Brahms envisioned these at first as exercises. Well, and then they ended up not being exercises, really, although they are pretty annoying to play, technically, not musically. And finally, one more thing I want to say about Brahms is, for me, Brahms's music, think of a prickly pear. On the surface, his music can seem very hard-nosed and even cold. I don't think it's cold, but I've heard people say it. Distant. But what's beyond that, when you listen a little more, you play the music, you realize that there's like a volcanic emotion behind it. And I think it's that contrast between, it's a paradox, I mean, that's what's difficult about Brahms to play. And that's what I find difficult, at least, to play his music. So here is Brahms' Paganini Variations, Book 2.
appreciate it. That's also a workout. I want to play you another workout of a piece, a couple short things. This is brand new for me. So that's the thing, we meet every month. And so I had a teacher who said to me that, you know, a piece starts to get good when you start to get sick of it. I never get sick of the things I play, but I hope you don't either. But that's why I try to bring these new things that are really raw sometimes and undercooked. But that's what I'm going to play. This is a very famous piece, which doesn't help my case either. This is Rimsky-Korsakov, The Flight of the Bumblebee. I think everyone knows it. And after playing Brahms, that's going to be more exercise. So that piece is part of an opera, The Tale of the Tsar Sultan, which I'm listening to in the car. I don't know enough about opera because I don't sing, so how would I? I don't play violin or conduct, or, you know, so that's a big deficiency I have, is not knowing enough about opera. And the scene in which this happens, it's an instrumental interlude. Some prince turns into a bumblebee to go see the Tsar. Don't ask me, it's Russian fairy tales, what do you expect? Yeah, now this is Rachmaninoff's arrangement for piano, which is, now there's another arrangement I'm learning. Have you ever heard of György Cifra, a Hungarian virtuoso pianist? He was out of his mind in the best way, and he wrote this version that doesn't even sound like a bumblebee, it sounds like a swarm of hornets. But another reason I learned this is to commemorate the season that's coming, and there are plenty of those annoying flying things in the air now. I did a little experiment. I love when music, again, can paint a picture or tell a story. And it sure did for my 4- and 6-year-old, because I'm not pushing them with music. I want them to do music, but we're hoping maybe they'll play some other instrument. How much piano can you have in one home? But I called them over to me when I was practicing. I said, so this is a bumblebee, especially to my 4-year-old. I said, okay. And I started playing it. He just started going, ugh, you know, because it's so, my wife, also, she's a pianist. I was practicing it. She said, every time you play that, I start itching. I start feeling like there's something. And so I hope that you'll, well, maybe I hope you'll experience that too. Here is the piece. Good luck to both, to you and to me, because I'm very new to this. Sometimes the bumblebee bumps into walls and things. My fingers are a little bit sweaty, so it doesn't help you there. Thank you. And now I want to play some French music. Debussy, arranged by Daniel Héricourt. And I'm so grateful that Jane Héricourt is here. I'm going to embarrass you a little bit again, but Jane is right here. And so Jane has given me a book with Daniel's compositions and arrangements. And I'm steadily working on learning, hopefully all of it at some point, but I'm a slow learner. So I haven't learned a whole, oh, the CD, is that? Oh, thank you.
Wow.
I appreciate that. Jane has given me, wow, complete solo piano music of Debussy, arranged by Daniel Héricourt. Played by Daniel Héricourt, rather. That's my, oh boy, this is going to be some wonderful listening in the car. Well, thank you very much. So, what Daniel did was, he was an amazing pianist. I've heard some of his recordings on YouTube, not the whole set, which I know. Thank you, Jane. But he did his own compositions. I'll play one of those too. And then, if we have time, and then I have, this is one of his arrangements of songs. And again, I don't sing, and especially in French, I can't sing. Maybe I should get my Queen's French teacher from high school. Maybe she could sing with me, I don't know. But this is a new arrangement for me, it's new. I've played you some of his other Debussy arrangements. This is Il pleure dans mon cœur. It rains, or it could even mean cries, but I think it rains in my heart. And I think it's a Paul Verlaine poem or something, the text. But anyway, this piece, it's what Eric does, just like Liszt did with Schubert, is he makes it work as a solo piano piece. It's so difficult, I don't know how he could do it, but very tricky to play. What this depicts is rain, but not hurricane rain. It's more of a gentle spring rain, like. Can you imagine, as much as you could imagine the bee swarming around, it should have that. So this is Daniel's arrangement of Il pleure dans mon cœur. I'd like to play this. It's a minute and a half, this piece. This is Daniel Héricourt's Pièce en forme de règle. Played it for you before. You don't think always of classical music as having a sense of humor, but this piece has a lot of humor in it. When I play it, I imagine a cubist painting of Charlie Chaplin. That's what it, because it's ragtime in its rhythm, but it has some odd chords. Just out of the blue. And this is the 1920s, this is modernism and the influence of Stravinsky and Ravel and everything, you know. So Here's the piece. I love this piece very much, and I've played it in a lot of places, and people like it. And I tell them the story of Daniel, that well, he was born in France. He knew Debussy, he knew Ravel, and then he decided the best place to be was Greensboro, North Carolina. And I don't think he was wrong, obviously. So here is the piece. Thank you so much. To close, I'm not going to make you late to dinner, I promise. So this is a gospel song. You've probably not heard it in a long time. It's one of those really old gospel songs that they don't do at the churches anymore, and I think it's too bad. This is by Albert E. Brumley, who wrote I'll Fly Away. This is called Turn Your Radio On. Have you heard that before? It's a great, great old song. So here it is. Have a great evening, and thank you. Thank you.
I used to.
Make sure you know there's baby and we have to pile in this living room
I
today.
used to have birds, but now I have cats, so there's no way.
Cat don't respond.